Welcome to the QBO Matrix module tutorial. The Quantus Matrix module allows power users to set up fuzzy logic rules in QBO. At its core, given a bunch of inputs or dimensions, a matrix will return the best match or matches based on weighted criteria. There are several use cases where matrices can be applied. A few example use cases are workless assignment. You can assign a team, person, and/or priority to work items when they are created. An example of this can be seen on my screen. Product pricing. Given a list of products, clients, and turnaround times, produce the appropriate hard cost and price we will charge the client. Workflow launching. We can launch the appropriate workflow for a state and process type. Or document generation. Generate a set of documents based on state and investor requirements. As mentioned, these are just a few examples of how the matrix module can be applied. For the purpose of this demo, we will assemble just one of these, workflow launching. When dealing with foreclosures, each state has its own steps or timeline that needs to be followed. Some states have more than one timeline, and the appropriate timeline is determined based on the foreclosure type, whether that be judicial, non-judicial, etc. Let's set up a matrix to choose the appropriate workflow for the state and foreclosure type. We'll navigate to Design, Matrices, and we'll click on the plus sign to add our matrix. Call this foreclosure tracking, and we're going to apply it to foreclosure. We'll locate our matrix that we just added, click into it, and that'll take us to the summary page. About halfway down, you can see the matrix view. It's telling us that we need to add some outputs before we can display anything. So we'll go ahead and click the Add Your First Output Now button, and we'll name this Decision Template. Decision Template is the QBO term for a workflow. I'd like you to note the absence of the space between decision and template. This is because this needs to match the database table name. Our output type is going to be string because this will be string of text, and our default output value will be left as null. All right, now that we know what the matrix is going to evaluate to, we will add our input columns. The input columns for this matrix are going to be state and process type. Both of these are going to be string. However, if we did want to evaluate based on a range, let's say a range of UPBs, we could certainly select that from the value type dropdown. We can also weight each of these inputs. However, we're going to leave these as 0 because both of these will be weighted the same. Second input column, as mentioned, is process type. And again, note the absence of the space between the words process and type. This does need to match the database table name as well. All right, our input and output columns are all set. So now let's start assembling the logic. Let's start with Alaska. We're going to add a single row. For our state, we'll use the abbreviation AK. And our process type is going to be judicial. For this, we are going to select the foreclosure, Alaska, judicial servicer workflow. Our next single row is going to be Alaska again. This time it's going to be non-judicial. So this will be the foreclosure, Alaska, non-judicial servicer workflow. Let's go ahead and skip to California. California is primarily a non-judicial state. So what we're going to want to do is set up a single row that will default to the non-judicial workflow. So California is the state. Process type we'll leave as null. And we now want to select California non-judicial servicer as our workflow. We do get judicial foreclosures in California, so we're going to go ahead and specify the judicial as well. So now we have 4 rows in our current matrix. Let's see how the matrix is going to decide which workflow to pick. So let's start with Alaska. And if we get a non-judicial foreclosure in Alaska, you can see the matrix is going to resolve to the non-judicial workflow. Since we specified non-judicial and judicial, and we were very specific about that, if we were to get some other form of process type in there, it's not going to know which workflow to pick. That is why we went ahead and set a default value for California. So if any process type other than judicial comes through the system for a foreclosure record in California, it's going to select the non-judicial workflow. If we should happen to get a home equity foreclosure, again, it's going to select the non-judicial workflow. However, if we do get a judicial foreclosure coming through the system, it will select the California judicial workflow. You can see the non-judicial workflow is also eligible. However, the judicial workflow wins in this scenario. Now, this workflow will need to be tied to the foreclosure process template so that it evaluates every time a new foreclosure is created and selects that workflow. We'll go ahead and navigate to our process template page by going to Design Processes, and we'll click into our foreclosure template. We'll click Edit here, and then we'll tell the template how to select the workflow. We're going to tell it to use a matrix, and we're going to select our matrix that we just added from the drop-down. You can now see that our matrix shows in the workflow matrix panel down below. We can actually manage the workflow of the matrix from here as well, just as we saw in the previous page. A full-blown workflow matrix has already been built out, as you can see here. So if one has already been built, we can select from the drop-down and it'll refresh down below. As mentioned earlier, matrices have many use cases and can be applied to each of those areas of the system once configured. This concludes the QBO Matrix presentation. Thank you.